these classes I've distilled from this book. I was so impressed by it when I read it back in the 90s that I created several classes, and it's good to go back through them because 30 years later, because the notes were a bit rough, and you can never really summarize a whole book. If you unless you spend a few months doing it. Anyway, so these classes, those other initial attempts, synthesized and transferred to PowerPoint presentation. So I do recommend, if you're going to read any of the books of value, that this book on Glamour could be one of the most important that you'll ever read. There's so much in it. There's so many levels of understanding, as with all the books, plus also the Tibetan touches on many different subjects besides glamour. So when we look at the stages of evolution of various sections of humanity, the first stage is where there is a materialized world that is recognized and valued and identified with. This is purely about physical pleasures and pursuits, like on the mutable cross. You may recall, I talked about the three crosses in astrology, where there is satisfaction for sex, for food, for warmth, material possessions, establishing a home of beauty and comfort. Generally, when people at this stage of awareness die, they go into the astral plane and create beautiful homes of beauty and comfort that they may have had or did not have in the previous life. However, Taurus, which rules the world aspirant and also is the bull of desire at the basic level we just discussed, leads to a growing sense of dualism. It happens just before the aspirant reorients to the probationary path, which is one of the stages of very early stages of initiation. So the second stage is when the person becomes aware of duality. There's no control over forces or energies. Note those two different terms. Energy is the original energy or force, but force is the secondary factor. No control over forces and energies within, and they're the victim of their own revolts, acts, and selfishly directed energies. Here is discovered the first duality of the physical etheric body, which of course we've studied. The diagram here gives us a memory, a trigger of what that actually is. We're working with these dualities, you see, through all the personality vehicles. We start off with the physical etheric towards the first initiation, the astral body towards the second initiation, and the mental body towards the third initiation, roughly speaking. But it's not that cut and dried either. It can be simultaneously all at once between any of the initiations. So the physical body is a mechanism of contact with the physical. The etheric body is a mechanism of contact with the inner world. It creates difficulty for humanity as a whole. But the etheric is the bridge between the physical and the more subtle realms. And so we cope with it blindly and ignorantly. Most world tension today, DK tells us, which was in the 1940s, is physical etheric. And I think that's still true. But with millions moving up more to the balancing of opposites within the astral body. Okay. We're told that the etheric force is closely related to the monad. Hence the emphasis upon the spirit today, the spirit of humanity, the spirit of a nation. The etheric body is the go-between, so to speak. And this battle between the pairs of opposites produces reorientation of the race as a whole and the individual to truer values, leading to the path of purification, to etheric unity, note that phrase, to a reorientation to clear vision of one-pointedness. And here is the devotee, the six-ray type, for instance, in the world of religion, science, politics, or any human endeavor. Path of purification has a lot to do with Virgo, of course, and Scorpio. Yet, paradoxically, this stage leads or glamours a person with a sense of achievement, surety, power, destiny, and yet people go ahead blindly and furiously until they're confronted by the pairs of opposites on the astral plane. And therefore, all the previous smug satisfaction, I think is the phrase that DK uses, disappears as the person is lost in the fogs of glamour upon the astral plane. This is the plight, he says, of many well-meaning disciples today. World glamour can only be dissipated by those who have wrestled with it. And in fact, we are told, DK tells us that the six-ray aspirants are the best ones for helping to dissipate glamour because they're in it up to their neck, so to speak. And that's a six-ray soul, a six-ray personality, or a six-ray emotional body, which most of humanity are. But of course, people on all the rays can help break up glamour, dissipate the clouds of glamour. Again, on this heading, under this heading stages of evolution, we get to number 3, the Arjuna experience, the world Arjuna from the Bhagavad Gita. The pairs of opposites on the astral plane, the indecision of Arjuna as he stands betwixt the two armies as illustrated in this picture to the right, where Krishna, his charioteer, a symbol of soul, is counseling Arjuna as he is paralyzed in indecision. So this world Arjuna relates to the first initiations and the masses in all lands, which I have been saying for the last couple of years is happening in another phase. World War One and World War Two was a huge phase of people taking the first initiation. And likewise now this undeclared World War Three is another phase of people waking up and becoming more independent in their thinking and wrestling with the physical pairs of opposites. And this is a long, slow process, of course. It can take a few lives. The amount of lives between the first and second initiations can be as many as 30, it was speculated. It's quite a long time. So difficult are the testings for the second degree initiation where the complete control of the astral is demonstrated. So the masses in all lands, the average educated citizen is going through the Arjuna experience, wrestling with the pairs of opposites on the astral plane. Hence the intense feeling, the search for light, the growth of knowledge, wisdom, right relation. Intense feeling, search for light. And someone who comes to mind who's really been through the mill, well, many people have, of course, but just recently, Sinead O'Connor, the Irish singer who passed away a couple of days ago. Two types of Arjuna. To the left here, we have the picture from the Mahabharata movie. Krishna on the left, counseling Arjuna on the right. He stands there with his bow, undecided about fighting his family, his near ones and dear ones. The point one, the bewilderment phase of Arjuna's plight, needs discrimination and decision, spiritual glamour and national glamour. This thing of national glamour and our cultural conditioning is very important to understand. We're in it so deeply we don't even see it. And hence it constitutes part of our dweller on the threshold and the national dweller or the global dweller. Point 2, recognition phase that sees the opposites of Arjuna's release becomes the warrior who fights, who steps consciously into the battle of the lighted soul who fights the darkened or imprisoned personality. And this is where the sign Scorpio comes in, of course, Mars the warrior, spiritual warrior. And hence enters the path of discipleship and brings about the resolution of dualities and stops identifying with either pairs of opposites. Can you hear the thunder? It's almost deafening.
I
Anyway,
didn't.
we press on. This is not the first time I've been in a storm in my travelling motorhome when doing a class. Or meditation. So the disciple stands free upon the middle way and sees the lighted way ahead. The moon is in Scorpio today, by the way, in case any of you have been wondering, the last couple of days, in fact, if things have been pretty intense emotionally, then that may explain part of it. The disciple learns to stand in the light between the pairs of opposites. This is a really important mantra, you could say, to remind yourself and to strengthen yourself when you're finding yourself really at wit's end, if you like, in that tension between the opposites. Any comments or questions so far? Zeus is doing his work outside, that's for sure. Throwing a few thunderbolts. All right. Stage of evolution 3C. The aspirant or disciple between the first or second degree initiation learns to distinguish between truth and truths, knowledge versus wisdom, reality versus illusion, and this eventually leads to the third degree initiation that corresponds to the intuition. The disciple discriminates and discerns at this point. Remember that the third initiation represents not just the mental body, but the personality as a whole. It's tame. And that's why, this initiation is regarded by the Masters of Wisdom as the first real initiation into greater consciousness of the planetary logos as a whole. So discrimination and discernment are factors related to this mental body. Duality leads to unity, which leads to a deeper duality, then leads to unity again. So we have the two fishes here in the duality of Pisces, you might say, in the hourglass. The disciple has now developed three capacities. One, to handle force on the physical plane. Two, to tread the middle way between opposites, the astral plane. Three, to use the intuition, which comes into play far more when the person is more mentally polarized. There's different levels of intuition that people have. There's astral intuition, of course. And this is probably the most common because the intuition from the plane of Buddhi or the plane of intuition finds its point of least resistance reflected in the astral body. Resolving the pairs of opposites on the astral, physical, mental planes leads to a climaxing resolution between the dweller and the angel, the shadow and the soul. Personality, if you like. The personality can be seen as the dweller, but it's not necessarily the dweller per se. All right. So as you can see, this is not easy information to understand. I just urge you not to be too daunted by that. Those of us who have been doing the teachings for decades still have to work hard at pondering on this material ourselves. So if you're a beginner, bear in mind that uh, rereading these books or rewatching videos and so forth um, constitutes the first, second, and third plowing of a field, as they call it. It is the ageless wisdom, so generally when you reread the same books, passages, it's fresh again. It renews itself in your consciousness. Often many of us have found we've read a book, say 5 or 10 years ago, and then we reread it as if for the first time and at a much deeper level. This is occultism. It's not an easy path. Mysticism is a much easier path, of course. It's the path of least resistance for most of it. Occultism requires great mental discipline and, of course, the attempt to blend one's mystical, heart-centered nature with the mentally oriented occult nature. So speaking of initiations, the first initiation relates to the resolved dualities of the physical etheric and where one can impose the etheric upon the physical. That makes sense. The second initiation, one chooses between the opposites and treads the middle way. This is very much, I think, specifically Arjuna's plight on the battlefield. And at that astral level, his feelings are really involved. He has emotional connections to all his family that he doesn't want to kill, that he's had since childhood. So Libra rules that middle way, where the oscillating pairs of opposites find a balance and therefore a decision can be made. Third degree, the intuition perceives the truth, first real glimpse of the dweller and angel, we are told. This is the thing. The dweller is not really recognized until one gets a fair way along the path towards the second degree initiation. Of course, we can recognize what we call the shadow and so forth and aspects of it. But we're told it's not really recognized until much later, more fully, I suppose, a more full recognition. At the fourth degree, there's a demonstration of a completed one-ment between higher and lower aspect of the soul in incarnation. One sees the dweller merge with the angel. They blend. The duality becomes synthesized into unity. The dweller is vanquished. And particularly at the fifth initiation, the dweller and angel of the presence merges in divine synthesis. So again, just mention that in occultism, just like any science, because this is a science, we have to learn the language, the lingo. That's why I always post a large glossary in my books and on my website where all these terms are defined. Just as a physicist or a chemist has all of the scientific terms and abbreviations for certain elements, so we have to know what the dweller is, what the angel is, what initiation is, and so forth. Initiation is a sub-science of esoteric astrology in itself, we're told. All right, so something a bit more tangible perhaps, causes producing world glamour. One, planetary causes, where there is an which is inherent in substance itself, we're told, from an earlier universe or solar system, incarnation of the solar logo. Now, can you still hear me? Because I can hardly hear myself. So heavy is the rain here.
Yes,
Okay,
the
good,
sound is good. It's
very good.
great.
One drama after another today. It's certainly been one hell of a day. I won't go into that though. Um, so it's in country causes, it's inherent in substance itself. B, it's within the life of our God, our imperfect God we call the planetary logos. And from the point of view of the other planetary logi, this leads to produce the seeds of death and decay, which the moon also represents because there is no real vitality or life on the moon, spiritually speaking, and creates obstacles that Saturn, the Lord of Karma, puts in our way and with which we struggle. So there are some of the planetary causes. Then number two, the causes initiated by humanity itself. Humanity has created and intensified the astral plane, as we learnt in previous classes, where I discussed Atlantis, the second root race, in fact, which corresponds to the second plane, the astral plane. How we have created heaven and hell, which are real but ultimately are illusions. The lower subplanes of the astral plane, hell, the higher subplanes of the astral plane, heaven. And therein is part of the planetary dweller and illusion as well, or glamour. All glamour is produced by bringing together one or more streams of energy which produce temporary whirlpools of energies. These temporary whirlpools can be seen just as like that clairvoyantly, which leads to producing a condition of darkness and bewilderment, making choice and discrimination difficult. Glamour is the psychic clouds of darkness that surround the planet. And some of it is so entrenched, it's been there for thousands and thousands or millions of years. And part of the work of the spiritual hierarchy and those who aspire to work with them is to dispel these clouds of glamour occultly through occult meditation, group meditation, particularly of course. Next week, we will do a glamour meditation and you'll get a feel for what that's like. Okay, just making sure I'm not going to float away here. All right, lots of water symbolic of the astral plane. Right, so in this section here, we're going to talk about the root race correspondences to the physical, astral, and mental planes. Of course, the Lemuria corresponds to the physical. And in that stage, we can have really no idea of the consciousness then. It's very different from what we have today. The disciples of that time, those who were on the path consciously, began to differentiate between themselves and the physical vital forces which led to a stimulation of the throat chakra, which of course is the higher correspondence of the sacral center. And this led to the initial glamour and recognition of the sex impulse. In fact, the teachings of that day, the spiritual teachings of that day, were pretty much what we call sex magic today. So it's way below the threshold of consciousness today compared to then. This in turn led to the necessary transmutation of sex by the initiate, hence hatha yoga, the binding of the etheric and physical bodies together. And so around the aspirants of that time could be seen the first hints and clouds of glamour, the first recognition of astral energy for the first degree aspirant. So bear in mind too, the Hatha yoga was used at that time as a method. That was the spiritual teaching of the day to help coordinate the gigantic bodies that humanity had between the etheric physical, because in the mirror they only just emerged from the etheric. For a while there, they were kind of half etheric, half physical, until they became completely physical. Eventually, all of humanity became aware of the new emerging dualism on the physical astral, which led to the urge to higher living or the tendency to lower activity. That was the choice that humanity had, which led to a nebulous consciousness and eventually to the voice of conscience, which of course is the soul. Many of you see that word conscience. It relates to the soul that knows better. This increased the intricacy and yet also the difficulty of life. It was only the advanced people at that time who evoked glamour. Bear in mind, with all the root races, there were always very primitive races that lived in those root races alongside others who are far more advanced, especially during Atlantis, because we had moon chain humanity mingling with earth chain humanity. So in Atlantis, there was a duality of the etheric physical, the soul, and this led to a sense of duality having shifted to the astral. And so the pairs of opposites such as good and evil, pleasure and pain, right and wrong, sense and nonsense, became more emphasized. So each race achieved this temporary unity in early stages as the initial duality was resolved. But as the race evolves, higher values emerge, creating a fresh realm of choice. Hence conflict, duality, leading to unity, leading to duality, leading to unity again, is the never-ending cycle as we move up the spiral of evolution. I think this is saying something like, evil is the good that we should have left behind. Very interesting phrase. That's quite occult in many ways. So mental consciousness at that time in Atlantis was a dimly visioned goal, which demanded to be developed to solve the problem of the lower planes. And eventually the mind as the distributor of light revealed the middle way and the person developed the power to pass between the pairs of opposites. So humanity as a whole were then and also now immersed in glamour, entirely identified with feelings, likes, dislikes, etc., and a dominant self-pity, which is the major glamour of the second ray of love wisdom. I'm not sure, did I run through all the glamours of the rays? I think I did in one of our ray classes. In fact, I should go through them again next week. Self-pity is the major glamour of the advanced sensitive humanity. They contribute the most to it, interestingly enough, hence their duty to clean it up. The Tibetan also says that the esoteric workers are the most glamoured group, which I find very interesting, because they think they're too clever by half. They've been given these advanced spiritual teachings and they think they know it all, and yet therein is the glamour. So this emerging mental consciousness in Atlantis was the factor, of course, leading to the Aryan, or the fifth root race, the following root race after Atlantis, by the advanced disciples of that time. And it also led to the Great Atlantean War, because there was a schism between the lower and the higher mental plane. That schism worked out, well, that was one of the reasons anyway for the Great War that we call the Mahabharata. There were several Mahabharatas. This was the original one about 4 million years ago. The most recent one was back around about 3100 BC. Right. The world has three main groups and three phases of glamour. The Atlantean is glamoured by materiality, the main glamour of humanity as a whole, and 80% of humanity are still focused, polarized in Atlantean consciousness. B, feeling in relationships. C, ideals based upon thinkers of the day but don't mentally understand. D, that demanded of beauty and comfort, that which is demanded of beauty and comfort. And E, spiritual comfort in the realm of religion, religious desire. So there's the Atlantean. Number two, the RN, or the fifth root grace. The mental factor is awakening, but with illusions of mental, plus the glamours of the astral, the illusions that are theoretical and intellectual. This is where a great chunk of humanity are at the moment, the so-called intelligentsia. And you could call this kama manas, or desire mind. Third group, those now active and hearkening to the voice of the silence of the soul. Illusion is rapidly growing as the mentality of the race develops. Remember the correspondences in the chart last week for each of the planes: Maya for the physical plane, Glamour for the astral plane, and illusion for the mental plane. Illusion is succumbing to the powerful thought forms of thinkers of the time and of the past. Those forms have now outlived their usefulness. They become a menace to the expanding life. Again, evil is the good we should have left behind. This is the thing with all thought forms throughout our life. We create these geometrical patterns, or roughly speaking, that help us get through life, and then they become crystallized, and we have to break them up so we can construct new ones for the next phase of our lives. So unless we do, they become a menace to the expanding life. Okay. Causes producing world glamour. Causes initiated by the individual. This is, sorry, remember we're in this, still under this main heading here of causes producing world glamour. So this is part 3. We did a little kind of detour there for a while. So part 3, causes initiated by the individual. Every soul that succeeds in releasing itself from illusions and glamours is serving a race. Work on yourself, as we all say. And there are many, many different ways to work on oneself, many different psychological modalities, esoteric techniques, and so forth. And we've all, I'm sure, investigated them and are still practicing them. When the astral and mental are functioning, glamour is being created. That's just a fact of life. Besides plugging into the glamour that's all around us in the everyday world, the Maya and the glamour and the illusion. So the soul in conflict with the personality creates glamour. There's hardly any of us who are free from this conflict between soul and personality at some point or other. I like to joke about the daily Kurukshetra. Okay, what's being served up for today? Careful what you ask for, they say. So there are individual glamours which relate to the etheric physical. This is called Maya, the astral plane glamour, the lower mental plane illusion. And the personality ray intensifies all three aspects, the threefold glamorous condition, and merges into one major glamour. Hence the importance of knowing, discovering your personality ray through concrete study and intuitive reflection. Of course, the soul ray is steadily increasing its potency once the personality ray gets out of the way of itself, so to speak. So, disciples on the path, and I'm talking between the first and second initiations, and there are various stages within that kind of discipleship, um, probationary disciple, accepted disciple, disciple within the aura of the master, and all that kind of stuff. Must differentiate between one, glamour in the environment, which one is attracted to, or attracts to oneself, the line of least resistance that we all carry at some point. How vigilant we have to be in our daily, um, going about our daily business, in and watch ourselves in our interactions. Two, glamour created as life unfolds, which is coloured by past incarnations and rays on your astrology as well. Hence, ascertaining, as I said before, your soul and personality ray is a great step forward in a method of release. It's quite a strong statement, isn't it? So, inspiration to go back to the soul and personality ray and wrestle with what it actually is. Soul personality integration is dependent upon the glamours of those rays. When all rays are ascertained, consider one, the nature, quality, stability of the glandular system. Two, the point attained in evolution by considering the chakras and their associated glands, their relation to each other. And three, recognition if there are splits in personality. Disciples must differentiate between A, between etheric physical, the lack of vitality, weakness, obsession. And many of us experience these personality schisms or splits or fragmentations, multiple personality disorder even. This is just natural, and it's part of being human and becoming more mentally oriented. The B, astral, psychological difficulties such as undue sensitivity, environmental glamour, sensitivity to the glamours of others. This is a very difficult one and a very common one. C, mental, control, when one is controlled by one's own thought form or national thought form or the thought in one's environment, idée fixe, sense of dramatic, fanatical ideal. Of course, an ideal is an idea that has been clothed in astral substance and has lost its original clarity or definition of thought. D, to differentiate between the etheric and astral, the astral and the mental. For example, the abstract scientific type often fails to handle physical plane living because they're up there on the abstract mental plane. They forget to have a bath. Quite often when you look at some of those third ray abstract types. Or they have a severe emotional disassociation. There's some quite famous people on the planet today who experience this, who demonstrate this, I should say. Causes producing glamour part 4. Consider the path of life through astrology, where disciples must differentiate between the sun, which represents the personality and life trends, and the ascendant, which represents the soul and the future. The individual situation is complicated by family, national, and racial tendencies as the sun is moving into Aquarius. Of course, we could add the moon here too, which is in fact regarded as the dweller on the threshold. And we've all got a moon. So understanding your moon, your dweller fella, and any aspects that the moon makes to other planets is a considerable step in understanding the obstacles to spiritual growth, as is understanding the ascendant and so forth. glamour, the astral plane is very much feminine energy, whereas the mental planes are more masculine energy. So women, we could say, are more prone to glamour, and men more prone to illusion. But that's not really true. But of course, women are manipulated through advertising much more than men in terms of being forced to look a certain way, to buy certain cosmetics, to, to have a huge wardrobe and so forth. So interesting that this magazine is called Glamour. Contrast between higher and lower glamours. Two things start to emerge. One, the significance of one's own nature with its essential dualism. Two, the recognition of the pairs of opposites with which one has to work, which can be seen as personality of soul, as the major duality that covers the whole of the first three initiations. Or at a higher level, the last three initiations, the integrated soul and monad or presence, is beyond most of us here today. But it's down the track somewhere. One life or another, we'll get to that point. So the contrast between illusion and intuition, the power of a thought form to dominate, producing limitation. So we have three types of ideas: inherited ideas that makes it difficult to adjust to a new vision of the world or one's own life and how that is placed in the social order. B, more modern ideas, which is a reaction of modern thought to the world and conditions various situations, and is a reaction based on tradition, whether it's national tradition or family tradition. And then there are the newer dimly sensed ideas that are precipitating into human consciousness that have the power to condition the future and lead the modern generation from darkness to light. So mental illusion is an idea embodied in ideal form, note that idea, ideal, which permits no room for any other form or ideal. And this leads to illusion and an inability to contact the world of ideas. One is tied to the world of ideas and idealism. This mental illusion imprisons a person. And a good idea, of course, paradoxically, may become an illusion very easily, proving disastrous in a person's life. So I think we can all honestly acknowledge to ourselves that we have been at one point or another in our lives or still subject to mental illusion. It's only when you move past the illusion and look back you realize that you were in the illusion. You can't see it when you're in it. The same with glamour. The glamour to which we must take a hammer, to use a first-ray phrase. All right, so we have the seven rays coming through the hierarchy, the seven streams of ideas you could call the seven rays. Most idealists, of course, are not in touch with the original idea. They're only in touch with the human interpretation of the idea. So many evangelistic preachers are the conveyor of an idea that is dressed up as an ideal. And people are swayed by the emotion of the presenter. So we're talking here, oh, I don't know if you heard that. That just about made me jump out of my seat. Sorry. Zeus says yes. He affirms. Illusion, So where was I? Yeah, only in touch with the human interpretation of the idea. I should have a microphone outside my window so you can hear the thunder and lightning. Illusion is a consequence of an idea being regarded as its entire presentation, but is only a part. It is seen separately from all their ideas. Problem of the human being is the inability to relate various implications of the divine idea to each other. So, and this is particularly important today because we have, in the last few decades, degenerated into such a low attention span. We are like the proverbial sparrows looking this way and that. Um, with, and I've been told, and there have been studies done on this, that many of the younger generation now do not have the focus to read a book from cover to cover, to even watch a video through from one end to the other. So we are in quite a parlous state at the moment. From Glamour, page 131, when the idea is visioned or grasped in a narrow, separative manner, the truth is distorted. There is an emotional reaction which feeds desire and consequently shifts off the mental plane onto the astral. Desire is evoked for a partial or inadequate ideal, and thus the idea cannot arrive at a full expression. The person sees only the partial ideal as the whole truth and cannot grasp the social, planetary, or cosmic implications. When there is a real grasp of the whole idea, there is no illusion. But then we can ask, well, how do we know we have a real grasp of the whole idea? Many people, including myself, think they do when it's only a partial grasp. Very sobering to reflect upon this. So the idea is so much bigger than the idealist, and humility saves us from narrowness. Humility, that is the antidote for hubris or pride, which of course the fifth root race carries in huge amounts since we have chosen to steal fire from the gods. So a vague interpretive reaction to an idea leads to fanaticism or fanatics, vague idealists, sadistic enforcers of ideas, such as in the Inquisition. And indeed, we saw a repeat of the Inquisition in the last few years, I think, in some countries. And limited, cramped visionaries. That's what a vague interpretive reaction to an idea can create. Touching an idea and transforming it into an ideal is the cause of much world suffering, as I was discussing before with preachers and rousing, inspiring speakers. The disciple must penetrate to the true idea which lies behind the ideal and interpret through the light of the soul. Comments, questions, clarifications?
I have one question, Philip.
I can see that, and I'm just waiting for people to gather their thoughts.
Um, if these glamours are so old, they come from Atlantis, as you said. If they are so old and so big and so strong, I am guessing they will keep on going to the next root race.
Yeah.
So do you think that in the next root race, much of these glamours will dissipate?
For a large majority, yes, I think so. And those who don't make the grade, as the phrase says, will be recycled into another evolution. Nothing is wasted. Everyone will get there in the end. Hopefully not the bitter end, but in the end. Yeah, we're talking very cosmically now, because we will all go on to other evolutions after this Earth evolution. Most of us will uh, start to tread the cosmic path to Sirius, which I meant to mention too. Of course, we are in the Leo full moon period. The full moon meeting will be on the 31st of August. The time has been sent out to you by Inez, I think, on email. I'll
Yes.
just do a short talk and mainly meditation. There won't be a webinar as such as usual, but uh, just to mention that the law of freedom is very much associated with Sirius. And I do have a post or two on my Facebook page about that in the last few days. Someone here has a comment. Daniel says, any directional way to identify ideal from idea? Good question. I don't know, is my initial response. You have to look at the emotional coloring and how you respond emotionally to an idea. Do you respond to it calmly or with much zealousness and perhaps even fanaticism? That might be one approach. Good question, though. Keep asking it to yourself. Right. Um, ideology. Ideas become ideologies. And today we're seeing World War III in a clash of ideologies. Many different kinds of ideologies floating around. Half-baked ideas, you could call a lot of them. Not true ideologies, but nevertheless reflect the many conflicting viewpoints today in the world. All men are equal needs emphasis because this is the basis of democracy, of which France and the USA were major, uh, struck major blows for, of course. But the need to consider the point in evolution racially, nationally, religiously as well. Enforced ideological systems of modern times have existed. We're told that Christ consciousness is the goal of humanity, but interpreted by authoritative religion and those who haven't developed Christ consciousness, it becomes a nice concept or a sadistic incentive, as we mentioned before with the Inquisition and enforcing uh, religion or God's word upon the people. The idea before the race today is re-establishing spiritual relationship which characterize the race in its child state, which is brotherhood. The race in its child state was at the time of individualization in Lemuria so many millions of years ago. The idea represents the renewed spiritual relationship, the ideal, right human relations, and the ideal, marriage, democracy, and liberty. These are the three phases that relate to the mental plane, the astral plane, or physical plane, respectively. So in religion, for instance, we have an idea that's posted through a religious text, and then it is surrounded with emotional astral energy, and it becomes an idea, which is far more palatable to the masses to respond to a charismatic speaker, for instance, which of course brings in distortion of that individual to the original idea. But nonetheless, it steps it down for the masses, and then of course the ideal becomes the idol, and the classic idol of worshipping the golden calf um, several thousand years ago is a good expression, it's a good example. But here we see the triplicity of idea, ideal, idol in a more positive light. Renewed spiritual relationship, right human relations, marriage, democracy, and liberty. liberty, equality, fraternity, as the French exclaimed at one point, and need to exclaim again, in fact. So all ideologies have at heart A, integral relations, B, spiritual objectives, C, positive brotherly activity. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm just going to go through the rest of this page, and we'll leave the other 22 pages for next week, or part thereof. The ideal is always a temporary expression of an idea and is not intended to be permanent. All ideals will eventually pass away and give place to a recognized spiritual relationship, a subjective fellowship. I love that phrase. Defined and expressed as brotherhood. When ideals dominate the mind, they prevent the free flow of intuition, as we mentioned before, frequently excluding love through imposed control that leads to a dark cloud that blots out the rain cloud of knowable things, as they say in Zen Buddhism. Therefore, intuition is the source or bestower of revelation coming from the plane of Buddhi. Its contact gives a progressive understanding of the ways of God. This leads to a transcendence or sense of immanence of God sequentially grasped. Then to an understanding of the plan or purpose working out where one can cooperate more consciously to hasten divine purpose. We've been given so much information in the blue books about the planetary purpose of Sanakamara, that we all have a reasonable grasp now of how we can help serve that plan within a group, individually, and these references everywhere. So I'll state again before we wrap this up today, these classes on Glamour are probably some of the most difficult in this course. And just want to, if you are a bit daunted by that, don't worry too much, because the ones after this, the classes after these classes will not be getting progressively more and more difficult at all. That's why I did leave these three to the last term to sow a seed and to for your consideration, of course. And AD says how to clear obsolete and crystallize thought forms and recognize them. Well, you have to recognize them before you clear them, of course. And when you do recognize them, you can send light to them. And this is what we'll be doing next week in the meditation. I'm going to start, we're not going to do the usual meditation next week. We're going to jump straight into the Glamour meditation with a little bit of an explanation to start. And just as a preview, if you do have the book on Glamour, perhaps you can read up on that. Or perhaps I can send the meditation out during the week for you to read. That might be better. Where you identify the main glamour in yourself. You know, we've all got several glamours we might identify, of course, but one that you want to start with. And then in this meditation, you actually visualize that glamour at a certain stage of the meditation and direct light towards it. The glamours are dispelled by the light of the mind. Illusions are dispelled through the intuition. So crystallized thought forms that you mentioned here are a conglomeration of astral and mental energy. They're not just pure thought.